Good morning and welcome to the Power Surge, fueled by Paul Bothner Music and powered by Cape Town Tourism. I'm Berry Gargan and this is the Power Surge. It is time to kick off your shoes, sit back, relax, open your heart, open your mind, open your ears and just allow the power to flow over you. And today is a very powerful day on the Power Surge. My first guest today is Stan Horwitz, who's a human resources specialist and organizational development practitioner. And he has got so much to tell us. This is a man who actually brings soul into corporate and especially into human resources. I have Stan Horwitz in the studio with me. Stan has a consultancy called HRNetwork, and he really has spent about 20 years or so, if I remember correctly. I was there, you know. I wasn't there. But Stan has spent about 20 years really developing human resources into a fine art, I would say. Welcome, Stan.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you.
Fabulous to have. I'm just going to push this slightly closer to you so that the microphone picks up your voice, because we do want to hear what you have to say. Stan, you are a unique person in terms of human resources and my experience, because I work very hard to help people get into alignment in terms of, and balance in terms of body, mind and spirit, bringing everything into alignment and balance. And you seem to do the same with businesses, helping them to try and achieve the same sort of balance. And for me, it's that is a bigger vision of how the world should be. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about your work in that respect.
So, Barry, I think, well, firstly, I don't think that the work that you do is separate. I mean, it's part of organizations. At the end of the day, most people as individuals are trying to find their own space in terms of that balance. And organizations really, at the end of the day, consist of either in small businesses a few people, and in larger businesses thousands and thousands of people. So all of those people are trying to find their own space and their own voice within a business that's trying to succeed. And the business, in its own way of trying to achieve its profits and satisfy its customers, is either selling products and services and trying to move forward with all those people. And they've got to be aligned, because if they're not aligned, if people aren't aligned, and it's not a manipulative process of aligning people, it's about saying what is important to you as an individual right now in the present, and how do you understand yourself right now in terms of where the business is going. And when those things are aligned and people are happy in their workspace, then they feel motivated and wanting to make a difference. But if they're not aligned, then you have a mismatch. And that often needs to be dealt with, either with the leadership that needs to either change, depending on the numbers of people who are not aligned, or if it's individuals that are not going with a particular culture where the business is trying to move towards, then obviously the culture itself needs to shift.
So it's really all about sharing a vision.
Very, very much so.
And it's almost as if, I noticed that it's almost as if businesses seem to take on an identity of their own.
Yeah. Barry, just to add to the vision, vision statements are, I don't mean to say it in a negative way, but they kind of become a bit old school. It's kind of, let's put it on the walls and say this is what we're out and rah, rah. I think for me it moves beyond a vision and says, what is our purpose? Why is this business here? And I often find with many, when I meet with clients, both at executive level, senior management level, and you say to them, what is the purpose of this business? And they say, well, we're here to sell 1, 2, 3, 4. So I say, no, that's not your purpose. That's what you do. So what is your purpose of your business? And they say, well, we're here to make money. It's an obvious question. Say, no, that's a result of what you do. So what is your purpose? And I can't tell you how much time we have to spend helping senior people actually rethink of their purpose in terms of how they impact the world, the society they're in, through what they do, and then redefine their brand in terms of their purpose. And that is also how when we get to that point, we're actually able to understand that real core purpose. A lot of it's unknown. It sits there. They know it, but they don't know it. It sits in a subconscious state often. And to bring that out through questioning processes, etc., at organization leadership level is the first step, because then we can understand where the individuals are at, and then we can start looking at where culture needs to work and what the vision of the business is, etc.
It's interesting, Stan, because two things are coming up for me here. And the first is recently a book that was recently published called Solving the Mystery of Success by Jose Durez. And for the first time in my life, on reading that book, I actually realized what a true purpose is, as opposed to what I thought a true purpose was. And I was so sorry that I read it at this stage in my life, not 20, 30 years ago, because I think I might have made
But Perry, you might not have been ready for it. None of us are.
That is the thing. Exactly so. It's true. But at the same time, I actually thought that that's the kind of book that I would really like to give my children. I need them to read that. I want them to have that information right up front. Young people seem to have that information, which brings me to the second point that came up for me as you were talking. And that is the point of social entrepreneurship, which is a wonderful new brand of business. I've spoken to two fabulous social entrepreneurs in the last week, Misha Teasdale of Green Pop and Rowan Pybus of Sunshine Cinema. Both of them making such an extraordinary difference in the world because they went, what do we really want to do? That's what we want to do. How are we going to turn that into a business? Can it be sustainable? And they've worked at making it do so. But their question comes from the heart
comes from
first.
the purpose, comes from the individual. And I think if we look at just more broadly speaking, with everything that's going on in our country at the moment, the issue is going to be increasingly the role of the state and the role of individuals and organizations to create jobs. And we know the state has played a central role, or centrist role, in creating jobs, or so-called jobs that are meant to be sustainable, but they're not. They're not changing lives. So, in fact, I read something recently that the majority of jobs being in South Africa are actually state or government driven. Okay, so the state employs more people than the private sector.
Okay.
And the state employing more people than the private sector means that the private sector, which is in a shrinking economy with everything that's going on with Eskom and all the other challenges that we've got, are not creating the jobs the way they're supposed to. So where are they going to come from? They're going to come from individuals with ideas. People want to make a difference in the world. It's about the entrepreneurs. And the challenge going forward is not going to be the give-outs of the past. It's going to be how to get a new working class in place that is innovative, creative, in their own space to create businesses. And in order to do that, the individuals have to say, what is my purpose? What am I wanting to do in my life? Okay, and then how can I impact that through creating a business? So I'm very much in agreement with what you're saying.
You know what is interesting to me is that this almost requires a completely new paradigm in terms of education and the way we educate children. So maybe the children who do go to the more progressive education schools are really going to have the edge in this respect. And then the other thing is re-educating business.
We need the education, but also we need the support. So people in previously disadvantaged townships, who are entrepreneurs, who are starting up their small little businesses, micro enterprises, are needing not only the financial support, but the skills and the guidance and the direction to take those and really grow them for themselves. So the challenge is, because those are the people that then employ one or two or three people.
Yes.
And that's where the future growth is going to come from. It cannot come from the formal sector. The formal sector is shrinking at the moment, and I think it's going to be for many years to come. The state have overspent, and hence the country's economy is already at risk in terms of other countries saying, the state needs to cut back on its expenditure, so it can't create more jobs per se within its formal structures. So we have a two-tier economy, and we have the working class who actually need innovative skills and technical skills on how to actually create employment for themselves firstly, through a business, through a vision, and then through themselves. And to do that, that's where HR actually starts. It says, how do we actually grow individuals, teams, people, businesses, and that linkage between all of that. So
say we have somebody listening who has a great business idea, who doesn't have money, who doesn't have a tremendous amount of good education or a degree or anything like that.
Yes.
How is that person going to access the kind of skills, training, and finances that they require?
The state does have a number of agencies within within its infrastructure that does provide certain skills. So they can approach, for example, CETAs. They can approach the venture capitalist organizations like business partners. There are small micro loaning process that the different departments provide financing to small micro businesses. However, they also want them to have clear plans in place.
Okay,
so it becomes a
that's
difficult one.
yeah.
But it's not always, Barry, it's not always a case of money. It depends on the kind of business that the person's opening. It's amazing when you see somebody standing, and yesterday, just again as example, because life shows you what's going on. Two people at a robot, we see it all the time. One person selling something, one person standing with a banner.
Yes.
Who are you likely to support? And who are you likely to encourage with what they're doing? It starts with also the mindset of the individuals who are supporting individuals who are in small businesses.
Yeah, true.
And state procurement policies also make a difference towards that. So, for example, the city of Cape Town, and where we're sitting, is actually in their procurement processes will often take a tender and break it up into smaller parts, especially in construction, so that smaller businesses can apply for parts of the bigger picture. And sort of, so there's a construction tender, it's often broken down into smaller parts so that the plumbers can apply for the plumbing jobs and the smaller micro enterprises, and so it grows. So it's a mix of those things. And also small businesses being smaller businesses, not just micro, but also smaller businesses. That's where our growth is going to come from. And then they're going to try and figure out the process of how they're going to go about it, and they're going to try and get some access to money. But it's not always about money. Sometimes it's about collaborating with people, it's about networking, it's about knowing others, it's about getting to meet others, seeing if you can put some resources together between a few people, rather than waiting for somebody as an excuse to say, I can't do this because I don't have money to start a business, is to say, I can do this because I have.
Look at what you have rather than what you don't have.
So that's perhaps the starting point. The second point is then to say, once I've started this business, it normally starts off with the individual and often ends up with the individual, depending on how businesses work. So if you look at the HR industry as an example, most businesses, most HR practitioners in South Africa that work outside of the formal sector work in collaboration with each other. So the larger projects, you bring other people to work with you on larger projects. It's not necessarily employing 25 people and having fixed overheads. So it depends on the nature of the business and the business model. But the person will start off, and then they will have to go through a whole range of HR type of issues. So they'll have to say, well, if this is what I'm trying to build, and these are the products or the services I'm offering, who's going to do it? And I'm going to then find people who are going to work with me or employ and bring into the system and into my business and actually grow them with the business that I'm growing. And so the first thing starts out with looking for the right people.
Well,
and
this is a
that's the
challenge.
most important part, because if that is the wrong fit, then those people sit with you, and then you land up with the negative side. So the match of the individual's purpose with your business purpose and the culture that you're trying to create and the skills that you're looking for, as well as what we call the competencies, are really, really important. And we move right through that, from attracting the right people to training and developing, to motivating them, to rewarding them, right through that whole chain, and then to keeping them and growing them as the business is growing. So you want your people to grow with you, whether they're full-time people or whether they're part-time people or whether they're part of a network of people that are working together. You want everybody to feel that they're maximizing their potential in that process.
You absolutely do. The sense of feeling valued as an employee is actually going to make you much more productive in the end, apart from making you a happier person.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me, Stan, I'm almost a little bit nervous to broach this one, but I want to. I want to know where into our economy and into that small business enterprise picture that we've been painting, where do migrant workers fit in?
It's a very tricky question, and obviously it's a very politically difficult question right now. It's charged, but I think it's one that has to be addressed. And I think many of the politicians, while they might not have addressed the actual issue, have alluded to the fact that during the past, leaders were welcomed within Africa. And at the end of the day, whether you're black, white, green, purple, Namibian, Zimbabwean, Malawian, or South African, you are African. The fact that you're a South African white person means you are an African. Because how can you be South African if you're not African? You've got to be. So when we start accepting a much bigger picture of who is African, then we start embracing differences and understanding that within our own society and even within our businesses and in HR, people spend a huge amount of time trying to get people to understand differences. Firstly, to get them to understand themselves, and the parts of themselves that they don't like, and the parts of themselves that they do like. And where does this resentment come from individually? Is it a financial issue? Is it a jealousy issue? Is it a territory issue? Exactly that, especially when it's small businesses that are owned by so-called foreigners. And is it why are people threatened by other people? What is the mirror of that other person holding up that actually makes people feel threatened by what they don't like? Is it access to something? Because many of those people who come into South Africa are just seeking better lives, and they flock to South Africa because historically South Africa has produced a better life for most people and continues to a certain degree, certainly from where it was many years ago. So they're looking for access to opportunities, as is anybody. And I think many South Africans are feeling right now a sense of more frustration because they're not seeing service delivery. Many South Africans economically are still left in abject poverty, in real poverty, and very little changes in their day-to-day life. At the end of the day, 20 years on, people are still not living in decent housing. People still don't have access to flushing toilets, to whatever it might be. And that doesn't help people not to feel resentful of other people.
Yes, I understand.
So it's an economic, a socio-economic issue, but equally so nobody obviously can justify any form of what goes on right now in terms of the violence and abuse we've seen.
So where do you see the hope? Where is the hope? How does one move forward economically and create a stable environment?
I think in terms of the integration issues, we need to look at ways of making communities understand, helping communities to understand. And this is where HR's bigger purpose lies. Again, it's business's bigger purpose. How do you impact what you do on the community that you live in?
So business can make
Absolutely,
a huge difference
100%. Business should be equal stakeholders and partners in that process of shifting, even if it's an education process around internally of how do we deal with difference? How do we actually recognize what is it within ourselves that make us react? The problem often is that I think that much of the violence that's happening is also from an age demographic of people who feel lost. It's a generation that doesn't have access to whatever it is, jobs, hope, education, etc. So
don't see
they don't
themselves
see
as empowered.
themselves as empowered and also being able to empower themselves. So a lot of the so-called youth, which is where the biggest unemployment levels lie, and that's why it's so important that we have programs that are building entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs in order at that particular level, because those are where the future is going to lie. And if we don't address that, these kind of socio-economic problems are going to continue because it's that sense of South Africa's hopelessness of a certain group of people who don't have access to education, don't have access to resources, don't have access to self-improvement, are never going to be able to shift themselves. So business has a role formally. They can help their own employees to understand differences, but that's not actually just the target group in itself. I think they do that already to a large extent. The target group's got to be a concerted effort across cities, across the different tiers of government, the provincial legislatures, local governments, City of Cape Town, for example, to say how do we actually address our youth issues, our gangster issues, because that's where the anger boils up.
Absolutely.
In all communities, and not just Cape Town, nationally. And then that age group is where I think I would imagine, I haven't seen a study, but I would imagine that somewhere between the age of 18 and 27 is probably where the most angry violence takes place.
We would probably have to start quite a lot earlier than that.
Yes.
In terms of the fact that I've alluded to this a few times, the figure of something like 65% of our children under 5 are growing up without fathers.
Oh, absolutely. So it starts within the family.
No male role models.
No role model, and financially the stress that causes for people is just horrendous. So it's a complex issue. But I think the mirror issue is definitely part of it. So we're mirroring, and we don't like what we're seeing. So when we see images that we see on the Sunday Times, it's let's blame the photographer, which I'm not saying is right that those images should be there. But if the state doesn't allow those images to be shown, doesn't want them to be shown, then we're not really being honest about what's going on in the country.
Absolutely.
And we need to show what's going on because it's real. So, and it's very disturbing, obviously, for anybody watching it. The question is, what what can we individually do in that space. And it is about creating more tolerance and awareness, and also understanding that we react because we're in a specific space. But the bigger challenge socioeconomically is how do we change that situation? How do cities, how do politicians, how do so-called leaders, which I'm not sure the caliber of the leadership, but how do we actually shift those demographics to actually challenge or to take on that challenge in a different way? So I honestly believe that a lot of South Africa's solutions have to focus in on that youth group. And I'm not talking about the youth group going to universities or technicons or who have access to, obviously they're part of that. But I'm talking about the youth who really just feel that there's nowhere for them to go.
And you feel that business has a responsibility?
I think it needs to be a state partnership. I think it needs to be each province and each city responsibility to engage business and to have cross-platforms of dialogue. So you mentioned earlier, how do we access capital?
Yes.
That needs to be part of it. Where does a young person with an idea access money in order to start something? Where do they access skills? So they're not going to get into universities and schools. Most of them are dropped out of school because of things. How are they going to get out of their drug things? Chrysalis Academy, Lucille Mayer, they do phenomenal work, for example, with the youth at risk. So how do we shift all of this process to get people to firstly rehabilitate themselves, to form their self-esteem, to become whole as individuals, and then how do they then equipped with skills and with resources to shift? Otherwise, how do we ever reach the backlogs of people wanting and expecting somebody else to do it for them? How many years are people going to wait for somebody to give me a house? It's not going to happen. The backlogs are just too big. So if one looks at the demographics of the backlogs, economically, people don't have access to resources, and no matter what government's in place, it's highly unlikely that they're going to. So it poses a huge challenge for businesses to do that, to invest in them, because that's not their employee. It might be the family of the employee.
Exactly so. So one wonders, you know what, it brings us right back to that old question about who is my brother, who am I responsible for?
Well, that says what is the purpose of the business.
Right, exactly so.
What is the purpose? The purpose of the business is to impact on society positively, and how? Yes, it needs to make money. Obviously, it's got to meet the stakeholders' things, but through what it doesn't make a difference in society.
I'm having a fabulous time, but I see that our time is flying past, as it so often
fast.
does. Loving these great conversations. Stan, we've spoken a little bit about the impact of companies on the outside and in terms of socially and in the community. What are some of the challenges they face internally in terms of human resources?
Okay, so obviously it depends on the size of the organization, because the challenges are different as a business goes through its own growth curve.
Of course.
But typically speaking, the first challenge that people have is drawing the right people into the business. So that recruitment aspect becomes really, really important. Are we matching the right skills to the specific job that we've got? And not only the right skills, but the right personality and the right mindsets. Those are really three components. So the recruitment process is the beginning of the challenge for most businesses. And then in that process it becomes, okay, so we've got these people on board and we're starting to do what we're doing. How do we structure ourselves? Do we have managers, supervisors? The bigger we grow, do we create more and more layers, or do we have a team that works together? And how do we incentivize? Do we incentivize with fixed pay or variable pay? And of course there's ranges of labor laws that govern how we actually operate, from the Labour Relations Act, Basic Conditions of Employment Act, etc., that we have to comply with. And those laws are also there to protect employees. So they actually are our labour laws, and while a lot of people think that they're not great, I'm one of the people who actually think that labour law is a good thing. I don't believe that anybody should just have the right to fire people. I think there should be a correct process in place. And there's no reason why businesses with the right knowledge should not know how to manage to exit an employee if there is a misconduct issue or if there's a non-performance issue.
Or even a personality clash issue, because that can really impact
Personality
badly.
clashes become even more difficult because it's not that is often not a performance issue or a discipline issue, although it can be a both. And so if it can't be addressed, then obviously it has to be managed somehow and in a fair way.
One needs to be able to measure it,
so
though, measure the impact.
You've got all of that, and you've got then the development, the training and development side of people. And then, as we've discussed, you need to keep people happy. So you've got to motivate them, you've got to reward them, you've got to incentivize people, and they've got to feel that they're actually contributing to something that's bigger than them, that they're actually able to make a difference, because they're looking to balance their EQ, their SQ, and their IQ, and their PQ, which means their physical.
Whoa.
Yeah, okay,
just unpack
stop.
that.
No, stop. So,
EQ,
so
SQ,
everybody's got their own needs that they're trying to fulfill. Physical needs, which is your physical, your PQ.
Okay.
Your IQ is your intellectual, your mental state of what you're trying to do. Your EQ are your relationships, your emotional maturity, how you interrelate with other people. And when all these things are in balance, then we achieve happiness.
But Stan, sorry to interrupt you there, but traditionally, we, as in the employee, I'm
putting yourself.
I'm
in
putting
that
myself
space.
in that space. Yes.
Right.
Traditionally, we've been responsible for our own EQ, IQ,
Yes, we are.
PQ. So, what responsibility really does corporate or does business have in that respect?
Well, I don't know if it's a responsibility as much as it's in business's interest to make sure that those things are in balance. Because if people find that those things are in balance and it's aligned to their purpose, so if we talk about SQ, so the last one I mentioned out, the individual's SQ, which is the spiritual quotient. Now, spiritual isn't the issue around spiritual as in religious belief, but it says, what is my purpose of why I'm here? Now, very few people go through that individual work, as you know, because you host this program. And when people go through that process of trying to find the balance between those four things, their physical, their emotional, their spiritual or their purpose, and that is aligned to where the business is going, then they're going to feel they want to be part of this. They feel they can make a difference. They feel they're able to achieve. They feel they're recognized for it. Their emotions are taken care of. Their physical needs are taken care of. They're paid appropriately in a fair way. That takes care of the physical side. When those things are in balance, then the culture of the business says we're actually able to grow our people in line with where we're going in terms of a value system that we actually have. And so those things link in from the business's growth.
I like that a lot, because what I'm getting a picture of is really a business that is organic in a way and seamless in terms of we're all in this together. It's a collective consciousness.
The collective consciousness is where we're not going to talk about transformational storyboarding now, but
Sorry.
is exactly where that process kicks in, because it enables that consciousness to be similar.
Yes.
Whereas if they're not, and we're not even aware of it, then, as I started off this discussion about saying, what is the business purpose? So if we don't know what that business purpose is, we're not conscious of it because we haven't thought it through in a much bigger way. Our purpose isn't to produce cell phones or watches or phones or whatever. Our purpose is much broader than that as a business. It's to impact in what way.
And I really do get that
that doesn't get asked. That's the most tricky question, and the one that needs to be the most time that gets spent on, and it's the least. Because it's easier to say, we've got a vision statement, and these are values, and these are our virtues, but we don't actually get into why we're here and what are these individuals here for, and how do we co-create what we're trying to do and make money in the process, because there's no point in being in business if you're not there to make money.
Absolutely.
That's nonsense. So, but it's an outcome. It's a result of what we do. It's not if it becomes the reason of why we do something, it becomes very, very shallow. And a lot of people it is. A lot of people it just becomes a monetary matter. Let's make as much money as we can. And there's nothing wrong with that to start off with, but as the business grows, that eventually loses its impact, and especially as it becomes a corporate or a larger company. And then people are saying, well, what are you actually giving back to the society that created you?
I really do get that it's important to express that, and it's an important question to ask. And it grows from there. But what I also want to ask you is, it is, as you've said yourself, rather time-consuming to actually to really ask those questions and get people to think about them and think them through and take ownership of them, and then to take ownership of the purpose. Yeah. But how much time should these businesses be spending on that?
I think quite a few businesses do a lot of it, Barry. So it's not a lot of it's not that businesses don't do that. They do. They do spend a lot of time in investing in people, and I mean HR is becoming more and more a core element as a partner of business leaders.
That's
because they recognize, especially I'm talking more the corporates, the larger businesses. There's a clear recognition by HR executive of the role that people play, and the line executive, the line management, understand that they can't do it without people, and they know that people are core to what they do. And they don't always know how, and that's why the HR role internally is so important. And there's some amazing, most of the HR practitioners in South Africa, I think, are amazing. And I just need to mention there's an amazing organization for HR practitioners, if any are listening in, called the South African Board of People Practices, which is the professional body within HR. And that team is doing amazing issues. I went to breakfast 2 weeks ago on business ethics. So they're having an impact in many, many ways in terms of recognition of HR practitioners at different levels. And we've got amazing HR people in South Africa, although our human resources is ranked lower. I think it's because of the challenges that those same practitioners are trying to deal with. It doesn't mean that they are not good.
I like what I hear you say, and I also like that the focus on HR is growing. And what also helps me to really believe what you're saying about the standard of HR practitioners in this country is the fact that just last year you yourself presented a paper in Amsterdam, and I know from what I've read about what you're doing that you're starting to have a lot more international recognition and interface with HR internationally. Where do we stand? We've only got a minute for you to answer this, though, Stan, because I know that Atuli and Justin are standing by with the news.
I think just very quickly, I think South African HR and organization development people in general can stand proud in where they stand in the global community. I think there's absolutely nothing to be embarrassed about. I think the challenges that we're faced with, given the societal constraints that we're faced with, make it more challenging for HR people, and therefore it's harder. Levels of education, levels of economic backgrounds that employees are entering into, and makes it more difficult for businesses. And I think that also gives us our strength. So I think that the Southern organizations, the Southern Board of People Practices, and others are doing a phenomenal job in raising HR in South Africa. And the standards have been set. They've actually had standards that are now being set by South Africans for the main elements within HR that have been globally recognized and adopted by other countries across the globe, which have been set by South Africans.
Stan, how do we contact you?
Probably the best way to contact us is through the website, which is www.HRNetwork.co.za.
Fabulous. Stan Horwitz, come back soon. Come chat again soon. I love talking to you.
Thanks, Barry.
You're welcome.